Have you ever wondered what true wisdom really is in a world full of unread emails, shallow relationships, and never-ending deadlines? One day, a man lost his job, went through a breakup, and ran out of faith in life. He came to a modern-day Zen master and asked, "How do you live wisely in the middle of all this chaos?" The Zen master smiled and replied, "Let me tell you a story, one that might just change the way you see everything." Ethan was a 37-year-old man living in a major city on the west coast of the U.S. He had a stable job in advertising, a decent income, and had been in a long-term relationship for nearly 6 years. On paper, his life looked fine until everything collapsed within just 2 months. First came the job. His company restructured after a merger, and Ethan ended up on the layoff list. No major mistake, just no longer aligned with the new direction. Then his girlfriend, the one he thought he would marry, told him she wasn't sure she was in love anymore. A few weeks later, she moved out of the apartment they had shared. Ethan, someone who had always kept things under control, suddenly felt completely empty. He stopped sleeping, lost his appetite, and most of all, lost his sense of direction. Conversations with friends felt shallow, meals alone were loaded with fast food and cheap wine. He tried the gym, meditation, self-help books, none of it worked. One night, after a mild panic attack, Ethan felt an overwhelming urge to get out of the city. No specific reason, just a deep sense of suffocation. He packed a backpack, grabbed his old car, and drove north toward a place he'd once heard was achingly beautiful, Olympic National Park in Washington. No one knew where he was going. No itinerary, no precise GPS. Ethan just knew he needed to get away from everything familiar: Zoom meetings, office lights, social media, and those pitying glances. In his mind, he wasn't searching for anything profound. He wasn't looking for answers to life. Just a little silence. A place where no one needed anything from him. And on that trip, somewhere between the ancient trees, the birdsong at dawn, and the moss-covered trails, he found himself in a moment that, later on, he would describe like this: "It was the only moment I was truly alive, after years of just existing." The next morning, Ethan woke up in his small tent on the edge of the forest, no car horns, no alarm clock, no schedule. He boiled some stream water and made instant coffee, then sat quietly, watching the mist drift through the canopy of giant ferns. For the first time in months, he didn't feel rushed. He decided to try a popular hiking route called the Ho River Trail, a path that led deep into the temperate rainforest, where trees dripped with moss and the air felt almost thick with life. He carried only a water bottle, some trail snacks, and a small notebook, something he brought along intending to write something, though he had no idea what yet. The trail was winding and quiet. His footsteps blended with the sound of dry leaves and the distant murmur of running water. With each step, it felt like he was leaving his old life farther behind: the reports, the tense meetings, the unread messages. Every footfall was a deeper breath. Around midday, Ethan climbed to a rocky incline with a view of the valley below. He paused to rest and take a few photos. As he stepped back to get a wider shot, his foot suddenly slipped on a patch of damp moss. In a flash, his balance was gone, and he fell backward. Instinct kicked in. His hand shot out and grabbed at anything it could, and caught hold of a small branch jutting from the cliffside. He dangled there, legs flailing in midair, a sheer drop beneath him swallowed by the shadows of the forest. His heart pounded in his chest, blood surged to his face, and all sound seemed to vanish except for the ragged sound of his own breathing. The branch trembled with each movement. It wasn't strong enough to hold him for long. Ethan knew that if he tried to climb, it might snap. All he could do was hang on, hoping for a way out, or at least a few more moments. As the panic slowly ebbed, he looked around. Near where his right hand clutched the branch, he noticed a small cluster of wild berries growing out of a crack in the rock. Plump, red, dusted with a pale coating, glowing faintly in the midday sun. For reasons he couldn't explain, in the middle of that life-or-death moment, Ethan reached out, picked one, and popped it into his mouth. The taste exploded, sweet, fresh, vividly real. It was as if all his senses woke up at once. He closed his eyes, chewing slowly, forgetting the strain in his arms, the drop below, forgetting everything. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about whether he would fall or survive. He was simply existing, no, not just existing, he was truly alive. The sweetness of the berry still lingered on his tongue, like a small shaft of light piercing through the fog of chaos in Ethan's mind. He had never tasted a berry so good, not because it was sweeter than the ones from the supermarket, but because in that moment, he was completely present. No past, no future. Just him, the berry, and the now. His hand still clung tightly to the branch, his arm burning from holding on for too long, but his mind grew strangely calm. The panic that had gripped him moments earlier was gone. He could hear the wind rustling through the leaves above, the soft trickle of water from somewhere in the valley, and birds calling to each other in the dense canopy. Ethan looked down. The drop wasn't deep enough to kill him, but a fall would definitely mean broken bones, or worse. He glanced at the branch in his grip. It creaked softly, trembling with every tiny shift in weight. He couldn't stay here forever. He knew he'd have to try climbing back up, but any wrong move could snap the branch. And then a strange thought passed through his mind. I'm not afraid anymore. It wasn't reckless bravery. It was peace. If this was where it ended, alone, in the deep forest, after tasting the sweetest berry of his life, then maybe, that wouldn't be so bad. At that exact moment, a sound came from his left. A larger branch, just slightly below him, within less than a meter's reach. If he could swing his body and release at just the right moment, he might be able to grab it, sturdier, closer to the slope, easier to climb. But the risk was real, miss it, and he'd fall straight down. Ethan stared at the new branch. Took a deep breath. He felt the air fill his lungs, noticed every beat of his heart. No rushing. No overthinking. Just full awareness of everything happening, right now. He counted quietly. 1, 2, 3. He let go. For a split second, his body dropped through the air. Then, thud. His hands gripped the thicker branch. It stung, but it held. He pulled himself up, bent his knees, found footing. Bit by bit, he climbed back up the ledge. Covered in dirt, moss, and sweat, but he made it. He survived. Ethan collapsed onto the grass, breathing hard. Above him, clouds drifted lazily across the sky. No applause. No miracle. Just a man returned from the edge. And he brought back something deeper than survival. A full awareness of this moment. Ethan lay motionless on the grass, his hands still trembling slightly after the life or death climb. His heart no longer pounded. The chaos had faded. All that remained was the cool air brushing against his skin, the damp scent of earth, and the wind whispering through the trees. The world hadn't changed, but he had. It was a strange feeling. As if, somehow, he had passed through an invisible doorway. Not into some new life filled with dramatic breakthroughs or flashy transformations, but into a different way of being, clearer, more present, more real. He thought about the berry. Just a tiny moment, an almost instinctive act. But that sweetness, that vivid aliveness, that strange peace, it had branded itself into his memory. And Ethan knew, no matter how many years he might go on living, he would never forget that feeling, what it meant to be truly alive in a single, unbroken second. He sat up, brushed the dirt from his clothes, and looked around, as if seeing the forest for the first time. The moss-covered trees were no longer just background, they were alive, present, as if the whole forest was breathing with him. Every birdsong, every breeze, every trembling leaf suddenly mattered. There were no more questions like, "What do I do next?" or "How will I get through all of this?" There was only, "I'm here." And that is enough. Ethan pulled the small notebook from his backpack. He hadn't planned on writing anything in particular, but for the first time in months, the words poured out on their own. I used to think wisdom was knowing a lot, controlling everything, staying one step ahead in the game of life. But today, as I clung to a branch in the middle of a forest, ate a wild berry growing from the side of a cliff, and had no idea whether I would survive, I finally understood. Wisdom is right here, in this moment. It's not letting what was or what might be take over your mind. It's tasting every small thing fully, even the sweetness of a berry in the middle of a disaster. He closed the notebook, tucked it into his pack, and started the walk back to camp. No rush. No need to figure life out. Ethan wasn't searching anymore. Because, for the first time in years, he had found himself. Right where he was standing. Ethan left the national park on the third day, driving along the coastal highway as the sun dipped low over the Pacific horizon. He no longer felt the need to find himself, because maybe he had never really lost himself. He had just been too busy to truly be present. He didn't return home with a 5-year plan or a carefully drawn roadmap for his life. He had no clear answers about his career, his finances, or his relationships. And strangely, that no longer scared him. Not because he'd given up responsibility, but because he'd stopped placing his happiness in the future. Happiness was no longer something that would come once everything was figured out. It was in the little things he used to overlook: the smell of morning coffee, the warmth of sunlight on his skin, a conversation uninterrupted by phone notifications. A week after returning to the city, Ethan sat again with the Zen master, the one who had simply smiled when asked what wisdom truly was. "So," the teacher asked gently, "do you still think wisdom is something lofty, found in books or someone else's advice?" Ethan laughed and shook his head. "No. Now I think wisdom is knowing to stop and eat a berry, even when you're hanging between life and death." The master nodded, a glint of quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "That's it," he said. "Wisdom isn't about controlling life. It's about being present in the life that's happening right now." Ethan didn't become a monk. He didn't move to a mountain or renounce modern life. He still looked for a new job, still had exhausting days, still lived in the real world with real responsibilities. But ever since that trip, he stopped living like someone waiting for something better to arrive. He found the good right here, in the moments already happening. And whenever things felt like too much, the pressure, the deadlines, the unnamed worries, he remembered that tiny wild berry, growing from the side of a cliff, in that moment suspended between life and death. And he reminded himself, "Be here. Just this moment. That's enough."